Congratulations to each of this year's honorees. Thank you not only for your outstanding work, but for joining us this evening to share your insights. I've invited you to join me on the stage for our conversation. And as you're coming to the stage, I want to give a special thank you to our awards selection committee, which is made up of foundation board members, past honorees, and other content experts who took on the difficult ask of reviewing applications from the many worthy candidates to bring us this year's honorees. Also, a sincere thanks to our Board of Directors Awards Committee, who put in many, many hours to make sure this event is possible each year. Now let's turn to the discussion. We are pleased to have each of our honorees join us for a live discussion about next steps in regulatory science innovation, allowing us to tap into the insight and expertise that brought each of them to our stage. So in listening to each of your remarks, a few themes emerged. You each mentioned the importance of communication, of providing greater access to shared resources such as data, and the need to do things differently, and not only in the pandemic response. Niall, would you kick us off? You mentioned the power of greater access to data for research generally. Would you tell us a bit more about the potential there and offer a suggestion or two for where we should look to innovate in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, thank you so much for this incredible award. Really, really appreciate it. And congratulations to Dr. Marks and Representative Kennedy. One of the problems that researchers face in the United States is A, our data is really siloed and incomplete, and B, if you can get your hands on it, it's actually quite expensive. And those two things throw up incredible barriers, and I think really limit the scope of the research that we can do and the findings that we can generate. So obviously, when we were faced with an existential crisis of sorts at the onset of the pandemic, with a lot of people wanting to discover real world insights into the data, we were fortunate to assemble this incredible consortium of private sector organizations that agreed to, pool their data and build a governance and privacy model around it, and sort of throw the gates open and say to researchers, have at it. So I think the challenge going forward is how do we make that happen when we're not in a crisis situation? How do we make that happen to address health equity issues or mental health issues or Alzheimer's issues? How do we do a better job of combining administrative data and clinical data and making it available to people?
Now, thanks for teeing up that importance of integrating data to tackle these challenges. I want to open it up while I threw the question to Niall. I'll open it up. Dr. Marks or Representative Kennedy, does either of you want to jump in on that idea that we need to work on making more of our data integrated and available to tackle some of these challenges?
Yeah, this is all I can say is amen, because we have had the challenges of trying to just do safety surveillance on COVID-19 vaccines that are administered to people in a variety of different locations that are non-traditional. And that has, I never thought that would be one of the largest nightmares of the pandemic, but it actually remains one to this day. And it's one that we're still working through. So amen to dealing with getting big data, because big data is incredibly powerful if you can get it.
Right. Right, because that idea, we simply don't, we got the shots in arms, but we didn't move the data to a place where we can access it to monitor the ongoing effect and power of the vaccine.
Right, and it's very odd to be envious of Nordic countries where they actually have the ability to actually have both safety and effectiveness data on their populations, because they have the big data at least in their areas.
Great, really, really helpful. I want to turn Representative Kennedy to you. Your remarks grounded us in the urgent need to change our response to the mental health crisis, to move beyond the one-size-fits-all thinking. There are so many more of us who've been personally affected by the mental health challenges in the pandemic and just all that has been happening. Would you take a few minutes to share your thoughts on the greatest area of opportunity in the mental health treatment space, and what might we start to do differently? Oh, could you unmute? There you go.
Thank you. So thank you, Susan, to Peter and Niall. Thank you for your good work and service to humanity through the work that you do in public service and in research. I'm a big, I think you guys are heroes, the people who are doing this groundbreaking research, helping the world get quicker access to life-saving inoculations is just fantastic. And my whole thing is also about data. So the brain is the last medical frontier. You know, my uncle, President Kennedy, challenged this nation to go to the moon. And I say in this generation, instead of going to outer space, we've got to go to inner space. And it's the same process as NASA. It's systems analysis. And it's marrying genomic, metabolomic, proteomic, phenomic data, and it's doing it in replicable science that will require enormous amounts of data in order for us to get teased out those therapies and interventions that could be most useful in the personalized medicine approach that we've come to expect in every other area of medicine. This is going to require a, quote, international space station approach. We're going to have to get international agreements to partner, to have common protocols so science is replicable. You know, the Bayh-Dole, you know, power of IP is great, but it's really hobbling our ability to do the kind of data sharing on the preclinical basis that is so vital for us to build the super highway of data that gets all of us down the same road, from Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and addiction and depression. All of these things as brain-related illnesses need to be focused on the brain level. And we have to put together the architecture of that research that will benefit all neurological and affective disorders. And so we need to modernize regulatory science and the FDA to better be able to serve the needs of people who are suffering greatly, just like we are with COVID. But we're not seeing that same political urgency to get a vaccination of sorts for pain that does not have the addictive side effects that analgesics today have with the opioids. There's nothing to say that we can't get that with our modern state-of-the-art biomedical research, that we can't get pain relief without having respiratory implications and addictive complications. That can just be done if we put the money to it, but we're not putting the money behind it. We're approving 13 new drugs for psoriasis. God bless people with psoriasis, but we're not producing new drugs for, you know, long-acting treatment for addiction. We're not researching as I said, some of these other molecules that can make a big difference in public health.
So galvanizing us on we have to collaborate and think differently about how we're approaching mental health treatment and just get after it.
And you know, if we subtype, as I said in my remarks, it's not depression. It's like autism spectrum. It's a spectrum of depressions. And if we have an FDA regulatory environment that has a smaller pool of particular genotype or other certain characteristics, and we test medications on that subtype, that should be the determining factor of whether that molecule is the one that can go to and it's a lot less expensive to take to market because it doesn't require these huge, you know, cohorts of clinical trials. And it'll be much more efficacious rather than us try to nail it all for all, you know, depressions as if they're all the same. We need that sophistication, and we need to, as I think, bring that orphan drug status to these underserved illnesses in order to once again bring pharma back to the research in this space. They've all backed out, and back to the real world. If we can see the total context of us not having a COVID vaccine, and that rushes us to this challenge, why can't we see that same real world evidence to get us to, you know, some of these answers that are better than the current solutions? And they're also better than the alternative. We're losing too many people to suicide every year, too many people to overdose. it's long past due that we had the kind of urgency that we brought to COVID, bringing that also to this mental health and addiction crisis.
And your advocacy and the work here in the data and the leadership, we've got some of the right honorees here, as well as the people in this ecosystem, to be thinking about it and addressing it. I want to turn, because you mentioned this idea of collaboration, and I want to note that Dr. Marks, you talked about the significant amount of work in collaboration and communication in the COVID-19 response. As we look to that innovation beyond the pandemic, as Representative Kennedy just mentioned, what are your thoughts on ways to continue to improve our communication and collaboration writ large?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. I think we found that the dialogue that we've been able to have with various groups, everything from patient advocacy groups to sponsors, to the constituents that we serve, other constituents we serve, it's been incredibly helpful. But particularly the dialogue with some of the pharmaceutical companies, the drug developers, has been very helpful early on in the process to avoid unnecessary work and rework that can often happen. Now, it's really a challenge because that time, the time that goes into those meetings, is not something that we have a ton of, but it has made a huge difference. And how we can figure out how to dole out that time in the most effective manner that allows us to facilitate the development of the most important drugs, biologics, devices that need to move forward. I think that's going to be something we're going to have to really think about as we move into the post-pandemic period. It's one of those things that we just haven't, it's just like how we're going to deal with work in the office versus work at home. We still haven't figured that out. We're also going to figure out, how do we allocate this incredibly precious resource, the advice that we can bring sponsors, the dialogue that we can have along the way when a product is development, that I think was responsible for why we shaved several months off of on the development time of the COVID vaccines. And those months, I think, translated into lives, we believe.
Well, and it strikes me that there's a way to take the liberalization of data and the collaboration and kind of focus, particularly in the mental health space, to then have those conversations with sponsors to better generate. I think there's a path here, but you're right, we have to figure it out. I am tasked with asking each of you I'm going to ask one more question that I'd like each of you to answer as we thank you and gather one more kind of glimmer of insight from you. But each of you also mentioned some of the pervasive challenges that we're facing today: health disparities, misinformation and disinformation, and stigma, particularly for mental health. How might we take on those challenges, and where should we focus our innovation efforts? What might FDA and what might the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA, what could we do differently to make a difference here? And I'm going to go in a little different order. Representative Kennedy, why don't you pick that up first, and then we'll go to Dr. Marks and Niall.
Yeah, so Dr. Marks talked about communication. I just wish that every time Tony Fauci had gotten up this last year, they would have had his colleague at either NIMH, NIDA, or NIAAA. We've seen alcoholism skyrocket, the deaths of alcoholism, deaths of addiction and mental illness. And it's shocking to me in this enlightened world that we wouldn't have conflated the fact that COVID is both a viral impact and a mental health impact. And we could have made an enormous impression on the American people who, when they got screened for COVID, they could have gotten screened for anxiety. They could have gotten screened for addiction. We would have been sending a powerful message to the country that the brain and the body are connected. And frankly, I think it's been a missed opportunity, but it's not too late to correct it. So I would think we have to show the integration of both of these things. And we know also the long effect of long haulers is going to be psychiatric illnesses. And so while we're tracking the data going forward, let's make that more transparent to the American people so they understand that it's not their fault that they're feeling miserable, that if they've had COVID, it could be part of the inflammatory response. And in addition to the fact that the stress and toxic environment we're living in also is as a result of COVID exacerbates the underlying crisis. So these are all communication methods that we can support through the Reagan-Udall Foundation, and I encourage you to continue to do that great job in communicating.
What a great charge for us to better communicate about the normalcy and the real impact of mental health challenges, and that we need to do better. Dr. Marks, you're next, and then I'll turn to Niall.
Yeah, so to try to be brief, I think we are a science-based regulatory agency at FDA, and Reagan-Udall Foundation, through your work in both social sciences as well as in medical sciences, is a science-based organization. And to the extent that we can help put forward this fact that science is so important, and what we do being based on science is so important to combat some of the disinformation, the disbelief in science, is something I think we just have to partner with. It should only be as simple as kind of the Joe Friday approach, just the facts, ma'am. But we need to do something more than that these days to get it across. So that's what we'll have to collaborate. I think we have to collaborate to do.
And we would look forward to that. It is the fact, but then the fact in a way that in presentations to scientists is different than in the presentation to consumers, and in pulling that together. Niall, last word on this session and on this panel.
Thanks very much. I mean, I think, while the last 20 months has been just incredibly challenging in ways we could have never have expected before the onset of the pandemic, I mean, there's also a lot of glimmers of hope for me. I think, a lot of the destigmatization around talking about and treating mental health, and, new ways of treating mental health, including telemedicine approaches and different things like that. I mean, we're sitting here with multiple approved vaccines in previously, people almost wouldn't have believed it. We've got several, antiviral treatments that have received emergency approval, or hopefully about to receive emergency approval. So I think, there's been a lot of dark times over the last 20 months, but I think when we look back and kind of focus on the achievements, to me, it shows that if we sort of set aside our kind of stock positions and actually work together and in a way cut through some of the BS and actually work towards solutions, there still is an awful lot that we can accomplish.
That's our phrase. There's an awful lot that we can accomplish. And if it weren't clear before, I think it should be clear from just our last 12 minutes of discussion, slightly longer, why each of you is an honoree for your work in data, in the work at FDA, and in work in mental health. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the work you've done that's brought you to this stage. You've given us some terrific ideas to ponder and spurred some innovation as well. So I'm going to take this. It's a wonderful note for me to wrap up this year's Innovation and Regulatory Science Awards. This is when people would be standing up and stretching at their seats. So we want to give our thanks to everyone at FDA for their extraordinary work over the past year. We say tireless, but I imagine that you are tired. And so please take time to rest. And again, thank you for your extraordinary service. I want to give a particular thanks among all the FDAers to Rear Admiral Denise Hinton, who had worked closely with us during her time at FDA and is now serving as a Deputy Surgeon General for the country. And thanks to our current agency lead, FDA's Acting Chief Scientist, Jacqueline O'Shaughnessy. Thanks to everyone who took part in tonight's program, especially our board, our sponsors, and of course, our honorees. Many thanks to our staff who made this happen. The Foundation strives to embody the spirit of collaboration and innovation, And this evening's program is a testament to the cooperation and hard work of all who got us here. We look forward to continuing our work with each of you in the next year and for the years ahead. Thank you and good night.